Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Ready Gaming Tech.com video, I have a question. What happens if you pair an RTX 3080 with an i7 4770K? Well, we'll find out the answers as we continue throughout the video. The RTX 3080 is a card which represents one of the higher end SKUs, of course, in NVIDIA's lineup, but it's also um, pretty much on par with the RX 6800 XT, which hasn't launched as of the time that I'm recording this video. And I do know that it's unlikely that many of you are going to be buying one of those GPUs to pair with an old CPU such as an i7 4770K in the long run, but there's always a possibility, especially given part shortages at the moment, that you're waiting for a part to ship and therefore you're stuck with an older CPU and pairing it with your modern GPU. Goodness knows it's happened to me in the past. Or maybe you're just watching this video for funsies. This will also be a first in a series of videos where I'm going to be doing very similar stuff to this, but across a much wider variety of hardware. But we'll go more into this in a future video. But it's basically inspired, of course, by the next generation consoles, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. As of the time that I'm recording this video, the Series X will launch in 4 days, and the PS5 is in about a week. Depending upon the region of the world, it could also be about 2 weeks. It's, of course, launching in Europe a little later than the United States. So I think at the very least, this is going to just be an excuse to have some fun. As for the system configuration, well, it is a Haswell i7 4770K, which of course is a 4-core, 8-thread CPU. And yes, it was kind of weird for me for a while when I only noticed that there were 8 threads available in Task Manager. I was like, I've got SMT disabled. What's going on? But yeah, the CPU itself is overclocked to 4.4 gigahertz. And funny story, I haven't put the CPU under any heavy load in a while. I quickly cleaned out the cooler and all of that jazz, and then I proceeded to install some games. And I haven't done any benchmarks or that many benchmarks at the moment. I've run a few, but when I even tried to get Horizon Zero Dawn running, it just crashed after a while it's optimizing shaders. And this is because that's very CPU intensive. And what I basically figured out with trial and lots of error is that my CPU is no longer 100% stable at the 4.4 gigahertz with the old voltage. So I basically slowly nudged up the voltage as you do to get a new stable overclock. Basically, just it seems like the chip has slightly degraded over time, but it was very tiny. I only had to nudge it up just a little bit. Another thing I did as well is I'm using an 850 watt PSU because obviously an RTX 3080 is kind of power hungry. So I figured that that should give us a little bit of extra overhead here. I'm not going to be overclocking the graphics card or anything like that. And I'm going to focus my tests still at 1440p and 4K. Yes, I am aware that that's not really pushing the CPU into the equation. It's still meaning some games, especially with ray tracing or something like that, would still be more GPU bound. But I think it's very unlikely that you're going to be running one of these combinations together anyway, and I think it's even less likely that you're going to pick up an RTX 3080 with the intention to run at just 1080p. So we're going to be focusing this as if you were using this as like kind of a stopgap measure, and again focusing on 1440p and 4K. With that said, let's have just a quick look over the system, and then we're going to start looking into the games. Okay, so we are not quite at the very beginning of Doom Eternal, but we are pretty close to the beginning. So I've got just a couple of weapons. We are running at 1440p with everything set to Ultra Nightmare, and I think it's fair to say that the frame rate is pretty damn good. I've chosen this area because, again, I don't want to spoil too much for anyone, but there are a large number of open areas which obviously put more strain on the system. And what the goal is, pretty obviously, is just to show you how the performance does. I won't be going super far into the game or anything like that. But the 4770K is clocked to a clock frequency of 4.4 gigahertz, which is a nice increase over the base frequency, but it's certainly now not exactly unachievable for a good number of these CPUs. So I think, actually, you know what? Let's just go through here. That was not a very smart decision on my part, but whatever. Sorry, just trying to not die. There we go. And murder you, murder you. Also chainsaw you. Give me some ammo. Sweet. And, well, I haven't been paying a huge amount of attention to the frame rate because I was just trying not to die there. But, with that said, seems like we're hitting 150-ish, 200 frames a second. And again, there is a lot of stuff happening right now on screen. So, this game, however, is kind of an outlier because it is extremely well optimized. And I kind of feel like they should just like clone the guys who made this game and have them be forced to like work at all studios and basically just optimize all titles because, God, these guys just doing amazing jobs in terms of optimization. Stomp. Optimization of Doom Eternal was really good. Alright, let's just ignore you. Yeah, we're good. I think we'll get just a little bit past this, and then we'll, yeah, I'm just going to leave that behind, because it doesn't matter too much. We'll keep going forward. There we go, we've got like the control-y thing now, the frag grenade. I prefer the cryo grenade, the ice grenade, but I think this one's pretty cool. This is a really nice area, because again, we get an awful lot of stuff that happens. Well, that was a terrible. And I think this is a good place to call Doom Eternal. I don't think that we're going to be going above this in terms of like CPU utilization. 150 frames a second, the RTX 3080 barely breaking a sweat. Certainly CPU limited, but given, again, the ridiculous frame rate that we're achieving right now, I don't think it's going to be too big of a deal. And Lara's latest adventure. I wonder what the next one of these will be. I wonder if it'll be a reboot. Again, we are running with everything maxed out. I've also decided to enable DLSS, although we'll be playing around with that as well as ray tracing, which we've got enabled at max at the moment. I'd also love to show you guys Watchdog Legion, but as of the time I'm recording this, the patch has yet to be issued, and it unpatched is not exactly a smooth experience. Furthermore, right now anyway, the anti-cheat thing, which I can't remember the name of, is not ideal because it seems to be blocking the hooking of Riva Tuner statistics, which is what we've got overlaid, of course, for our performance metrics, and unfortunately the game doesn't have its inbuilt one. I could probably get around that by like messing around with different applications, but honestly, it's such a broken state, which hopefully will be patched the next day or two. I just kind of figured, what's the point? But anyway, we are in the marketplace, and you can see that this is absolutely pounding the system. It is pounding it, I tell you. And this is probably about one of the worst case scenarios. You'll find that even if we go to ray tracing and we disable it, there's not a huge difference in performance. And this is particularly noticeable with hitching. So they're hitting like, 70-ish, 80-ish frames per second, but it doesn't really make a huge difference at all. And what's really cool about that is that you could do something like, just for example, I mean, this is just being silly. Like, as a way to find the silver lining and the clouds. We can actually do something like that. Disable, excuse me, DLSS, and it's free. So yeah, the GPU is still pretty much doing nothing. I'm using even NVIDIA Shadowplay simultaneously for this, and yeah, no real difference. But this area, as I just mentioned, is one of the more demanding areas in the game, to my knowledge anyway, particularly for the CPU. But I have done some testing off camera, and you can get a relatively hitch-free experience if you decide to go ahead and basically limit the frame rate to around 60. If you do that, then you could probably get a decent experience. I imagine if you were playing on like a mechanical drive, you'd probably get hitching anyway. Although I'm running on an external USB SATA device. Sorry, that made no sense. An external USB SSD. There we go. I got there in the end. I know tech, I do. But yeah, what we'll do is we're going to head our way to the nearest. Which is the nearest? I guess we can go for that one. All right. Let's just toggle the waypoint. Yeah, let's do that. That was not what I was intended to do. I think it's through here, and it should be. Yeah, that looks right. I think it's up here somewhere. Yeah, I think it's that one. That looks right. Sweet. And we will go to a less demanding area, because this is one of those things that I find extremely interesting about this game. Which one is it? It's not Collapse Temple. I think it's Tomb. I think it's this one. It's been a while since I've played through this game. It's really good, I think. I think it's a good game. I do think the story's a little weaker than Rise of the Tomb Raider. I think 2013 and Rise were the better games, and I think 2013 was a better title. I think it was the best game. I think they kind of slightly got worse each game. But that's just my opinion. But this area I love because you can actually see the difference in CPU utilization. So here, if we look at this fire where there's not a huge amount going on, the CPU is pretty much not doing a whole lot. But the moment we go through here, unsurprisingly, with tons of light sources, crap tons of physics happening, you know, a lot of water physics as well, you know, down there, you know, we've got water, we've got like all those light sources, and obviously a lot of stuff happening in terms of view distances. Yeah, the system is just getting absolutely pounded, and we're hitting high 80s, excuse me, low 90s in terms of CPU. Now this is what I think is quite cool, is if we go into here, and we start playing around with the ray tracing settings. Where are we? Ray tracing. There we go. I think it's just so cool how much of a difference it makes in the scene. Like right here. Let's turn Lara around, and you can see the difference in ray tracing visualization, and just in terms of the atmosphere of the scene. I think it's such a difference. Anyway, that's not what we're trying to do. Damn it! Let's. Actually, there's something else I forgot to just enable, excuse me. We want to go back and we want to crank on DLSS. That should give us what we're looking for. Just for a second there, you can see that it's kind of like, what's going on? Again, 60, 70% CPU, but the moment we go through here, it just starts to absolutely go up ballistically. However, this is incredibly playable still. And it really, at least in my opinion, I think it's a great testament to just how... I think it's a great testament to how games have just been held back CPU-wise with the current generation of consoles. And furthermore, I think it's also a great testament to the fact that while CPU technology has certainly come on leaps and bounds without any question, just for example, a 5900X, which I'll be receiving pretty soon. I'm actually waiting for my shipment on my back order, so I should receive it in the next I was told about the 20th, which isn't too bad. But while obviously the 5900X or a 10900K, which is what we'll be comparing in a moment in terms of benchmarks, is much faster than something like 4770K. I think it goes to show you that software hasn't really taken full advantage of it. And architecturally, those processors were, Skylake was a nice IPC bump from Haswell or Sandy Bridge or whatever. But I would argue that we haven't seen massive leaps, and Zen 3 is a little more impressive, perhaps, of an IPC leap than what we're traditionally used to seeing. Zen 2 actually was pretty damn good. But I think now we're starting to see really good IPC leaps. Obviously, Rocket Lake is going to launch, I think it's like Q1 it's going to hit. And then obviously with Zen 3 refresh and all this stuff, I think CPU technology is going to start to really move forward. Games are going to take advantage of a lot more threads. But just the fact that you can run these CPUs at pretty high clock frequency, again, 4.4 is nothing unheard of for a 4770K or a Devil's Canyon 4790 or even like a 2700K. What I'm trying to say is that these CPUs are definitely in their twilight years, and I would never in a million years suggest that you do pair one of these CPUs with an RTX 3080 in the long term. However, if you do have one of these processors, I think it makes a really good secondary system, or maybe you give it to your friend or something like that. With that said, I think we've had a look at a couple of games and just seen some gameplay. We could run through a whole, other slew of titles. Horizon Zero Dawn is actually really similar to Shadow of the Tomb Raider, really depending where you are, hitting 60, 70 frames a second in gameplay. And, yeah. But instead, let's look at some benchmarks and then we can kind of wrap this up. Well, guys, it's been fun. Um, I think it's fair to say that it's the twilight years for the i7 4770K, but I think it's also the twilight years for many four-core processors for that matter. But just because we haven't moved on super amounts in terms of IPC, up until quite recently, games have just not taken full advantage of what modern CPUs can offer, which is why, of course, CPUs such as Haswell are still usable. I think next couple of years things are going to change considerably as games developers start to really leverage what the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X are capable of, and to that end, naturally, the PC platform too will benefit. But I think this has been a lot of fun. It's not the first time I've done a retrospective featuring the 4770K. Last time was with an RTX 2080 Ti, but there were not some games available when I last looked, and furthermore, we did not have the RTX 3080. Definitely, as I've mentioned many times now, I would not recommend seriously you run this configuration for any length of time. But I think it's just been really interesting to see what such an interesting combination is capable of. And Haswell is still capable of kicking out decent frames a second. It also reminds me somewhat that a number of you, of course, do upgrade to the latest and greatest hardware. And as a reviewer, some hardware I do get sent for free or I get to keep it. Other times I just get to play around with it and need to send it back. But obviously I'm in quite a privileged position there. And not only that, number of you just don't really care about the latest hardware, not even from financial reasons. You just, you know, gaming is something you do a couple of hours here or there, and it's just not something you want to justify spending a crap ton of money on. And it's also quite interesting too from the perspective of building systems for friends or maybe your kids, and you don't really want to spend like 1,500, 2,000 on a new system for kind of a younger kid, and then obviously goodness knows if they're going to spill like spaghetti all over it. I think what I'm trying to say is that the PC platform is very interesting because of just how scalable it is. And I think it's really cool that you can wring so much performance out of this old hardware. We'll be doing a lot more investigation when we look into the Xbox Series X, the PlayStation 5, and also systems around, given, of course, the RX 6000 series is currently just about ready to release. Nvidia apparently will be launching the RTX 3080 Ti, which is going to be interesting in and of itself, and the next generation processors from AMD. And Intel allegedly will be launching Comet Lake in Q1. I think it's going to be very fascinating to see how game engines change to take full advantage of this. We know titles like, say, Dirt 5 on both next-gen consoles are not really fully taking advantage of the CPU. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see exactly what a next-gen processor on a game engine, which is based on, let's say, Unreal Engine, would be capable of actually bringing to the table in terms of physics, geometry. For now, the twilight years of Haswell are definitely here. But you know what? I can't help but feel that someone who has been rocking one of these processors and maybe is jumping ship to a 5900X or whatever must have a smile on their face with just how much time they've had. And it really does go to show you that you don't need to buy the latest and greatest processor. Up until recently, anyway, yeah, Haswell has been absolutely fine, especially if you're able to overclock. But with that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. It's been a little different, but I think it's been quite fun. If you have enjoyed it, the normal stuff, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Um, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.